Sin, evil, idolatry, rebellion, death, depravity, human depravity. Why is the world such a chaotic mess? Well, if you were to ask the average believer today why there is evil and chaos in the world, they would typically point you to Genesis chapter 3, Adam's sin, that is, the fall of mankind. But if you were to ask that same question of a first century Jew, you would get a completely different answer. An ancient person would not isolate the totality of human depravity to an event that occurred in the garden. No doubt, it's obvious that what happened in Genesis 3 is responsible for the entrance of evil in the world, but a first century Jew would say that there are actually three reasons as to why the world is such a mess. They would point to what happened not only in chapter 3, but also in chapter 6 and chapter 11 of Genesis. The events depicted in these three chapters provide insight into the origins of idolatry as well as human destruction, self-destruction, that is, human depravity. And most telling, and this is important, the first century Jews would pay particular attention to what happened in Genesis chapter 6 concerning the sons of God. Modern believers do not see how that human depravity is connected to a rebellious group of divine beings, the sons of God. We do not see it because we lack the original ancient context. Who are these sons of God in Genesis 6, verse 2? What about the Nephilim in verse 4? And most importantly, how is it that the verses, that is Genesis 6, 1 through 4, how are these verses connected to the wickedness of man that is out of control in verse 5? Well, these are serious questions that need answers, but before I address them, if you're ready to let the Bible be the Bible, then make sure that you subscribe to this channel. I post a new video every week, and I am committed to grappling with the meaning of the biblical text to uncover what it is that God is saying to you and to me. All right. As I said, modern believers simply do not see how human depravity is connected to a rebellious group of created beings that are known as the sons of God. We do not see it because, well, we lack the ancient context, the original ancient context. Who are these sons of God that are spoken of in Genesis 6? And what about the Nephilim in verse 4? And most importantly, as I've said, how is it that these first four verses of Genesis 6 are connected to verse 5, where it describes the wickedness of man being completely out of control? Well, let's begin by reading Genesis 6, 1 through 4. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Well, reading the text, it seems rather straightforward. The sons of God had relations with the daughters of men, and a race of giants, the Nephilim, were the outcome. But how do these four verses that I just read connect with the fifth verse? Let me read it to you. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. How do we connect the action of these divine beings, the sons of God, with human wickedness that was so bad, it is written that everything these humans thought or even imagined was consistently and totally evil? In other words, human depravity was on full display. Well, as I previously said, modern believers simply do not understand how verse 5, human depravity out of control, connects with those first 4 verses, that is, the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the Nephilim. There seems to be no relationship between verses 1 through 4 and verse 5. And the reason why we simply cannot make that connection is because we, as modern readers, lack the original ancient context. There are facts that the ancients knew and understood that we do not know. What do I mean? Well, biblical writers, they had a supernatural worldview that often dipped into ancient Mesopotamian culture. This culture, that is the Mesopotamian culture, and its literature were often referenced in their writings. An important key for explaining human depravity out of control in Genesis 6:5 is to understand the original context of Genesis 1 through 4 and its ancient Mesopotamian backstory. So let's take a closer look. When it comes to the fact that human beings sin against God's will, there are 2 explanations for that human condition. The obvious one is what happened in Genesis 3 when Adam and Eve disobeyed the command not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The New Testament informs us that when Adam and Eve ate from that tree, sin entered the world. This is what Paul writes in Romans 5. When Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. But this act of disobedience in the garden fails to explain how things got so bad that God was sorry that he made man. And what happened in the garden fails to explain why it is that God chose to wipe out humanity with the flood and begin again with Noah. But modern believers will declare that Genesis 3 indeed is the proof text for everything that is wrong in our world. But here is a fact that is relevant for our discussion. The writers of the Old Testament never refer to Genesis 3 as the chief proof text for human sin. Let me say that again. The writers of the Old Testament never refer to Genesis 3 as the chief proof text for human sin. These writers never mention Genesis 3. Despite repeated descriptions of humanity's sinfulness, there is not one single citation of Genesis 3, or Adam's fall, if you will, in the entire Old Testament. It's just not there. So how then does one account for the description of human depravity in Genesis 6:5? This verse clearly states, that is, that mankind is completely wicked, with every thought, every imagination being totally evil. Well, the Jews of Jesus' day would tell you that the answer is found in the actions of a fallen group of divine beings, the sons of God, of whom Daniel calls the Watchers. These sons of God are created beings who make up God's divine council. We read about this council and the sons of God in Psalm 82. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. And then when you move down to verse 6, you read this: "You are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you." This is God speaking to these Elohim, these gods, and he's calling them sons of the Most High. These sons of God were created beings, beings that God had created, and they made up his divine council. And Genesis 6 informs us that some of these sons of God abandoned heaven for the attraction of female flesh. And the outcome of that attraction, well, it was the Nephilim, a race of giants. But the biblical text does not give us the context for human depravity that followed. But again, if you were to ask a Jew living in Jesus' day why the world and all of humanity was thoroughly wicked, out of control, they would tell you that the rebellious sons of God, the watchers, are to blame for the saturation of evil in the world. They would point to texts like the book 1 Enoch that provided ancient context for what happened in Genesis 6. Books like 1 Enoch, that is, they were well known and they were read by the disciples. Peter uses 1 Enoch as context for what he writes in 1 Peter 3 about Jesus preaching to the spirits in the prison after his crucifixion. Jude even quotes 1 Enoch when he's warning about false teachers. So what ancient context does 1 Enoch, what is this ancient context that is 1 Enoch, what does it reveal to us about the events in Genesis 6? Well, it reveals that these rebellious sons of God, these watchers, they did more than just have relations with the daughters of men. They taught human beings various points of knowledge that corrupted humanity. 1 Enoch reveals that these fallen watchers, these fallen rebellious sons of God, they taught humanity a variety of things that engendered lust, warfare, astrology, drug usage, and occult practices. In short, these watchers gave tools to humanity to destroy themselves. But that was not all that these fallen sons of God did. By having sexual relations with human women, these watchers produced a lineage, a race of giants that would destroy humanity. 1 Enoch records that these giants ate everything that humans produced, that is, what they grew, and then they began to cannibalize the humans themselves. Simply put, the world had become hell with humanity and with the presence of these giants. They were all wicked to the core. Human depravity run amok. This context provided by 1 Enoch, that is, helps explain why it is that God chose to wipe out everything with the flood and start over again with Noah and his family. And it would appear that all would be well with this new start with Noah because Noah is depicted as a man who walked with God. But after the flood, all was not well. Human depravity did not disappear. Human wickedness was still very much in play. And the question is, why? The rebellious sons of God were imprisoned in Tartarus, as described in 1 Peter 3. They're out of play. The depraved humans of Genesis 6, together with the out-of-control giants, they were destroyed by the flood. Yet human depravity continued. What is the explanation? Well, obviously sin had entered the world through Adam's disobedience, but this does not explain the continued presence of human wickedness that was out of control. So once again, we need the context, the ancient context that books like 1 Enoch provide for us. It did not matter that the fallen sons of God were imprisoned in Tartarus, or that the giants were destroyed by the flood. The answer to the question as to how human depravity escalated after the flood has something to do with the Nephilim. And 1 Enoch gives us a very important detail. What is that important detail? The death of the Nephilim is the point of origin for demons. Let me say that again, because that's very important. The death of the Nephilim is the point of origin for demons. The Bible itself does not tell us how demons came to be. It doesn't tell us at all. They simply show up with no explanation as to how they came into this world. And let me just say this, because this is often stated. Demons are not fallen angels. Please hear me. Demons are not fallen angels. The idea that Satan rebelled before creation of humankind and took a third of the angels with him is simply not in the Bible. There's not a single verse in the entirety of Scripture that tells of the original rebel sinning before Genesis 3 or a third of the angels falling before humanity fell. The proof text, and I know people will say this, well, they'll tell me, no. This idea is clearly stated in Revelation 12 regarding the dragon and his tail sweeping a third of the stars to earth. And that is assumed to be Satan, of course, bringing down a third of the angels or fallen angels to earth, and they become the demons. But people, that is not what's going on in Revelation 12. The timing of these actions is in conjunction with the first coming of the Messiah. The birth of Jesus is clearly in view in Revelation 12. Demons were already present in the world before the birth of Jesus. So how did demons come into being? Well, the Jews in the first century knew of the origin of demons. They would tell you, based on 1 Enoch and other ancient texts, that demons are the disembodied spirits of dead Nephilim. Evil spirits came forth from the dead bodies of the fallen giants. Because these giants were both of human and divine origin, they could both physically die, but they could also spiritually be immortal. On the one hand, the body of their flesh, it would die. But on the other hand, their spirits would have continued existence. And because these Nephilim were begotten on earth, the spirits of these dead giants must remain on earth. And here on earth, these disembodied spirits make up an empire of evil spirits who wreak havoc on the human race. The spirits of dead Nephilim, demons, are very much a part of the human experience of evil. Human depravity that was sparked by the original rebel in the garden has now been inflamed and accelerated by a new rebellion. The disembodied spirits of dead Nephilim, revealed in the Bible as demons, are the supernatural explanation for humanity's descent into self-destruction and idolatry. The demons both influence and enter humans to attack them, causing disease, blindness, and self-destruction. And they are aligned in utter opposition to God and are committed to deception and destruction of His imagers, all of humanity. It should be of no surprise as to why Paul, writing to the Ephesians, said this: "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." We know that the depravity of human beings, well, obviously it began in Genesis 3, where the first man and woman chose to disobey God. But once again, that text does not explain how things accelerated to such an extent that everything was out of control. Well, now we know, and Genesis 6 gives us that understanding, particularly as we look at these ancient texts together with what Scripture reveals. We have a broader picture as to why human depravity is in the world in which we live. Hey, listen, I do hope this has been helpful for you. If it has, would you take a moment just to hit that like button? And if you've not yet become a subscriber, take a moment as well to hit that subscription button. As I've told you, I put out a video every week, and I truly am committed to helping us all together grapple and understand what God is communicating to us in His Word, the Bible. I am committed to that. So I hope you'll come along and be a part. And as always, God's very best to you.